All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're really excited to be here with all of you to celebrate Jelani Cobb's brand new book, 3 or More is a Riot, Notes on How We Got Here, 2012 to 2025. Dr. Cobb is here in conversation with Errin Haines, and I want to introduce Errin first. Errin Haines is an award-winning journalist and a leading voice at the intersection of race, politics, and gender in America. She's the editor-at-large and a founding mother of The 19th, an independent nonprofit newsroom that aims to elevate the voices of women, people of color, and LGBTQ+ community in American journalism and democracy. She's also a MSNBC political contributor. Haines is also the 24th president of the National Association of Black Journalists, which is the oldest advocacy organization for journalists of color. Prior to joining The 19th, Haines worked at the Associated Press, the Washington Post, the Orlando Sentinel, the Los Angeles Times, and the Atlanta Daily World. Her work has been featured in publications including Time, Politico, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. Haines' coverage spans the White House, Congress, campaigns, and grassroots movements with a sharp focus on how policy impacts Black women and marginalized communities. Her expertise on issues of race, gender, and politics make her a sought-after thought leader in her industry, and she has served as a leader, mentor, and advocate for newsroom equity throughout her career. She was a visiting professor at the Georgetown University Institute of Politics and Princeton University, teaching classes on Black women and democracy. We are very excited to have her here. She is currently writing a book on Black political leadership in Atlanta and the legacy of the city's Black mayors. Whether in print, on air, or on stage, she is known for telling the truth with empathy, urgency, and unmatched clarity. So we know that she's going to be an amazing interviewer for Dr. Jelani Cobb. Dr. Cobb is the current dean of Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism. He is a staff writer at The New Yorker, author of several books, including The Substance of Hope, Barack Obama and the Paradox of Progress, and To the Break of Dawn, a freestyle on the hip-hop aesthetic. He is the editor, co-editor on multiple volumes, including The Matter of Black Lives, the Essential Kerner Commission Report. Dr. Cobb is the producer, co-producer on documentaries, including The Riot Report. He received the Peabody Award in 2020 and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Commentary. Dr. Cobb currently serves on the board of directors of the American Journalism Project and the board of trustees of the New York Public Library. We're very fortunate to be here in this historic library. We're very grateful to all of the librarians who make this space possible for us, who help us celebrate our free expression, and for all the journalists who help fight for our free expression every day. So please put your hands together for Jelani Cobb and Errin Haines.
Okay, yeah, shout out to the First Amendment while it still is intact as of today, absolutely. Well, hey, how's everybody doing? Good evening.
All right, you got me? Yeah, flip the switch.
What is that? How's that? Oh yeah, that's much better. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
The 19th of me is going to say Happy Women's History Month to all of you. Jelani
What else is it?
What else is it?
What else is this month?
Oh, it's Errin Month.
It's
but
Errin
I mean,
Month, right.
You know, they don't need to know that. I mean, they probably already did know that too. They were going to wish me that as soon as we got off stage. But thank you for remembering Errin Month.
So Errin Haines institutionalized having her birth month be an actual thing. And so, like, it's Errin Month. Everybody knows that March is Errin Month.
A historian would remember that. That means a lot. Means a lot. Well, I'm happy to be in my other living room, the Auburn Avenue Research Library. Thank you so much to the library for hosting us, because this is a place that really holds so much of our history, our memory, our record, really, of who we've been and who we're still becoming, especially as Black America and as documenters of who and where we are as a country, right? So I'm here with Jelani, and just for those of you who, yes, Dr. Cobb for some of you, but for me, this is my former neighbor.
Like literal neighbor who used to live
Grant
down
Park
the hall from
residents.
each other. Yeah, right.
So like from Hansel Street to Auburn Avenue, this is really kind of crazy that we are sitting here in conversation as the Dean of the Columbia School of Journalism and President of the National Association of Black Journalists somehow, but.
I think that means we're supposed to pretend that we're mature and grown-ups.
That's probably not gonna happen, you all, but we will try our best. But I'm so excited, honestly, about Three or More is a Riot, because so much of these essays, I feel like, you know, we've talked about so many of the ideas that came to fruition with these essays and now with this book, and so for us to just kind of revisit this journey, not just that you were on, but really that I feel like I got to see a lot of as a journalist that was with you in so many of these moments. I know that you are one of the people who has helped us make sense of the last decade plus of American life as we've been living through it. And so to reflect on that with you really it feels like an honor. It feels like an honor, so thank you.
Thank you
For letting me be here with you to talk about what I think is not just a collection of essays, but really a record of what it means to be paying attention when history refuses to be quiet. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, what's funny is that when I realized that we were going to be in dialogue about the book, one of the first things that came to mind was Ferguson.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we were in Ferguson reporting, and I had been reporting and writing for years, but this was early in my relationship with the New Yorker specifically. And when we actually, with multiple times of trips to Ferguson in 2014, but the real serious one was that when the grand jury report came down of the non-indictment of Officer Darren Wilson in the death of Michael Brown, and everything erupted. Yes. And we were on North Florissant, and I don't remember why I had to kind of walk down this street, but there were literally bullets flying around. I mean, things were on fire, people were smashing windows, all kinds of stuff was going on, and it was gunfire. It was like a lot of bullets flying around.
And this is like amid holiday decorations, like
Yeah.
Thanksgiving and Christmas when this is happening. So it's like this chaos and this city is burning as, Merry Christmas lights are strung up downtown.
It's bizarre.
It was totally bizarre.
But I do remember, I'm walking down the middle of the street, and Errin was like, maybe you should walk off to the side. And I was like, oh, that might be a good idea. It's probably fewer bullets bouncing around in that area. But that was literally the kind of connection, literally under fire, and trying to do our work.
Yeah, just casually ducking tear gas and hand grenades in suburban cul-de-sacs.
Right.
What a time, what a time. So, I mean, yeah, I do think, I think about those moments when I'm reading this book, and we're going to talk about the book, of course, Protest and Power and Race and Democracy, and really journalism as memory, right? And so I think, let's get into that. I mean, 2012, Trayvon Martin, kind of, the start of Black Lives Matter to 2025.
Mm-hmm. So,
I've had a lot of hairstyles since then. You, not so much, but
yeah, whatever.
I mean, I say that to say that, I mean, this book covers what has felt like a lifetime in American politics, right? So, but I wonder when you look back at this body of work, you see all of these essays here together. What do you see that you couldn't see when you were writing these?
Oh, so the thing that's interesting is so I have a background in history. So for half of my career, I've been an academic historian, but I've always done journalism. And there's a kind of interplay of the two of them. And the thing that we always say is the main virtue of history is that things make more sense looking backward than they do looking forward, or at the time. And so going back and revisiting the pieces, you start seeing the relationship between different things. So one thing that was notable, right? We talked about Trayvon. I'll give you a little bit of background about how and why this piece starts with Trayvon Martin, which is that in 2012, I was at a reception. Actually, I was at a dinner event, and my friend Khalil Muhammad said, I'm going to seat you across from David Remnick, say something smart. And so we're at dinner and we wind up talking. He invites me to contribute to the New Yorker. And I was like, yeah, he probably says that to everybody. And in fact, he does not say that to everybody, right? He says that very rarely. But I follow up and I get into a conversation with Amy Davidson, now Amy Davidson Sorkin. And she and I were just talking, just batting things around. And she said, what do you think of this thing in Florida, which wasn't really even a thing. Yeah. Like the name, right, the name Trayvon wasn't even associated with it. And she was like, why don't you take a look at it and see what's there? And so I filed a piece called Trayvon Martin and the Parameters of Hope, which was about the contrast between the 17-year-old black boy being killed and us having our first black president. And so at the time, Trayvon was the centerpiece of this conversation, and it was a lens through which you could see a lot of things. But I talked about in the introduction, two things come out of Trayvon that have tremendous ramifications for the coming decade. The first is that after George Zimmerman, who is the self-appointed neighborhood watchman who killed Trayvon Martin, after he's acquitted, there is a Facebook post from a 33-year-old labor organizer in the Bay Area named Alicia Garza, and she concludes it with "Our Lives Matter," which is shortly thereafter amended to "Black Lives Matter." And that's the origin of that language, like the language comes out of there. And then 2 years later, in Ferguson is where this Black Lives Matter idea explodes into public consciousness. And it pushes Obama, it pushes these social, it becomes everything that you all know it was associated with in those years. At the same time, there was a scrawny 18-year-old high school student in South Carolina who sees the Trayvon Martin situation and is enraged and becomes convinced that black people somehow interprets this to say that black people are out to get white people. And it sends him down an internet rabbit hole where he imbibes all kinds of white supremacist propaganda, and it culminates in him 3 years later, in 2015, murdering 9 people in the basement of Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. And he says in the interrogation room when he's being interviewed, he says that he did this in reaction to Trayvon Martin. The reason that you can't leave Dylann Roof as a kind of isolated response is that he writes a manifesto in which he says that he wants white people to gather together and defend their self-interests because white people were supposed to be at the top of American society and they've forgotten that, and that they need to put black people back at the bottom. And the day before he'd committed those murders, Donald Trump had declared for president of the United States. He had launched his campaign. I'm not saying there's a causal relationship between those two things. In fact, I don't think there is a causal relationship between them. But they are responding to the same zeitgeist. This idea that black people have gotten out ahead of where they're supposed to be in society. And so in that moment, this one thing that Amy requested that I cover, that I look into, became a lens through which we could see the decade of politics that came after it, and decade plus, because we're still in the midst of the echoes of these kinds of responses.
Yeah, very much so. And I do think so much of your superpower as a journalist is rooted in who you are and who you have been as a historian, being able to take that long view and also to connect those dots in that way really positions you uniquely to make meaning of who and where we are in this country. I mean, I'm just listening to you talk now. I wonder if there were other moments kind of along the way in the journey of this book and these essays where you realized that, I'm documenting something bigger than I understood at the time that I was doing it.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there are really too many of them to take note of. One thing that I think was really interesting was I had been writing about the various challenges to voting rights.
Yeah.
And that had been significant. That's always something that's significant, especially in Atlanta. And I'll say one thing up front is that 2012 was at the end of my time here in Atlanta. I taught closer, I think I left technically in 2013. But I came here in 2001. And so I taught at Spelman for all of that time, and I was connecting with all of the significant history here and interacting with people who were significant parts of the civil rights movement and all that. And that was very much the lens that I brought to the things that were happening after that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I had been steeped in all of this that was here. So looking at what voting rights means, particularly in a city like Atlanta, and then looking at the assaults that were taking place, one thing that really clicked, and I haven't forgotten it, has been the interconnection between voter suppression and immigration suppression. They go together in American history in these ways that once I thought about it, once you see something, you can't unsee it. I'll just give you two examples. The first is that in 1965, in August of 1965, when LBJ signs the Voting Rights Act, which obviously transforms the demography of the American electorate, he is very clear about how momentous it is. And he had even given the speech, 5 months earlier, saying that he would sign this legislation. Everyone knows that this is something that has will have a huge impact. 7 weeks after he signs the Voting Rights Act into law, he signs the 1965 Immigration Reform Act, and he is quiet about it. As a matter of fact, he lies. He says that it's not going to make a significant change in American immigration at all. And of course, anyone who looks at that legislation knows that it's going to radically transform American immigration, which heretofore had been immigration for Western European white people. That was what that legislation was intended to do. The 65 Reform Act opens up the doors. People from Latin America, people from Africa, people from the Caribbean, people from Asia, people from the face of what American immigration looks like now. And when we go back, 40 years before that, the 1924 Immigration Restriction Act, which was a white supremacist, eugenist act, was meant to prevent exactly these types of people from being able to immigrate into the country. And it happens in the midst of Jim Crow disenfranchisement, because all of this is about demography, and it is about curating the electorate, who was able to participate. And the other example, that's one. The second example is the 1798 Alien Act, which we all learned about in high school, or we learned about in college, and here's what I learned in high school. In high school, I learned that the Alien Act of 1798 changed the amount of time it took to become a citizen from 5 years to 13 years. So what? Okay, all right, that's what it did. Later, I figured out, when I had a PhD, I was like, oh wait, no. This is connected to the battle between the Federalists and the Jeffersonian Democrats. And John Adams knows that the Federalists are not popular with immigrants, but he also knows, looking in 1798, he knows that in 1800 he is likely going to face a challenge from Thomas Jefferson for the presidency, and Thomas Jefferson's party is very popular with immigrants. And if you change the amount of time it takes to become a citizen from 5 years to 13 years,
Citizen as in voter.
As in voter, you cut off an entire demography of people who would be Jefferson voters, but they're not allowed to vote. And so we don't even grapple with the fact that the first Immigration Reform Act in American history was the Voter Suppression Act. And those two things have been paired ever since. And so I would not have thought about those connections if I wasn't covering both of those things separately, and then going like, wait, like there's something happening here, and then going back to the history and actually seeing what the ties were.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it is interesting the time, your time here, and also kind of the trajectory of your journalism career.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, yes, being in Atlanta, you cover civil rights figures.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 20 years ago, it's covering them talking about the gains
Mm-hmm.
that we had as a result of the fights, the battles that they fought and won.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we are now very much in a time where we are not covering the vestiges of racism.
Right.
We are seeing its resurgence. And
Right.
so, like, one thing that strikes me about this book and this work is that it's not just a collection. Like, it literally reads like an evolving argument about the country.
Mm-hmm.
So, the name of this book, Three or More is a Riot, also could have been, you know, y'all ain't gonna believe this shit, but here we are. And we talked about you naming this book, that book. So let's just bring the group chat out for the people, because this is a phrase that carries a lot of weight, historically, politically, rhetorically. Explain kind of what that framing reveals about how this country understands protest.
Oh, Three or More is a Riot. So, Three or More is a Riot, the title came from two places. One is the 1739 Stonewall Rebellion in South Carolina. It was a mass slave revolt, and it, you know, South Carolina has a particular history of being the only colony that had a majority black population. And that had a lot of implications for South Carolinians. For our purposes, the main one is that white South Carolinians were paranoid as shit because they were surrounded by black people. And that lends itself to a super rigid adherence to the kind of doctrines of kind of the slave-owning class and complete control and so on. And after Stono, the colonial legislature passes a law that criminalizes the gathering of 3 or more Negroes outside the company of a white man. And so essentially, slave revolt was, you know, if there were 3 of you together. Because of my warped sense of humor, I was in the New Yorker's offices once, and I saw Khalifa Sana, and he was talking with Hilton Alls. And I jumped into the room and said, "It's a slave revolt," and then jumped back out.
Revolt's over.
So, in any case, you know, that was about kind of black people and their collective, their ability to be a collective in any kind of way, any kind of space. It was also interesting to me that, you know, civil codes define riot, many of them define riot as public mayhem committed by 3 or more people. And I was in these situations where that became completely relevant time and time again. I was like, 3 or more is a riot. But I was thinking about this in South Carolina after I covered Emmanuel AME. And so that was where the title of the book came from.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, to think about in a variety of contexts, right? 3 or more black folks in line to vote.
Right.
3 black women headed to the Senate next year, right?
But it's also like, you know, the kind of inherent limitations on things, like the fact that we count, you know, the fact that we still, like, we have to count because we know that there's a threshold, you know. Like, one of the interesting things, when scholars studied, you know, sociologists and policy people, when they started studying white flight, you know, back in the 70s, they realized that there was a threshold effect. Like, black people could move into a neighborhood and they'd be like, "Oh, great, the neighborhood's, you know, diverse." And then another black family move in, and then the third one, they're like, "What the hell's going on here? This is the hood. It's the hood, I gotta get out of here." Right, and so that same sort of threshold effect happens in America. Like, whether that is representation in the corporate world, certainly if there's representation in the political world.
Yes.
And there is no such kind of quota for white people.
No.
I mean, there is, like, black people will
Well,
notice.
there are too few of them.
Exactly,
of them
exactly, it's too
somewhere.
few. Like, if black people will notice there's spaces where we are not, or other people will notice, whatever group you are in, you notice when you're not in a place. But what we're dealing with demographically is the fact that we've run up against the ceiling of tolerance for us, aspirationally, geographically, politically, and all of these other dynamics. And I think that has been an engine that has driven so many of the dynamics that I talk about in this collection.
Yeah, I mean, that language, that math is about control. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? How has that language, to your point about the book, been used to control movement?
Well, I mean, I think that there's this dynamic of, one of the interesting things is like, there's like a cyclical thing where, something happens that shocks the public conscience, and as a result, people begin to discuss it or begin to advocate for reforms or begin to ask for changes. And almost simultaneously with the effort to institute reform, there's a conversation about if the people asking for reform have gone too far.
Yeah.
And so we saw it like with Me Too. People were like, has Me Too gone too far? I was like, they just got started.
Right.
Like,
They don't feel
too
it.
far, they haven't gotten anywhere yet.
Full-blown reckoning.
Right, it's like, oh, and then with George Floyd, it was like 15 minutes in.
Reckoning over.
Yeah, reckoning over. And in fact, there was a concerted push, by generating this kind of paranoia about things like CRT, which is what this, started out with. And then, segueing from there to DEI,
Yes.
to like everything that you find to demonize, to the full-blown white nationalism of the Trump administration. Even when Erica Green kind of wrote that piece in the New York Times about Trump being asked a question about the civil rights movement, and he says the result of the civil rights movement is that white people are treated very badly. And that's the lens through which he sees it. And so these movements always have to reckon with this kind of headwind, or this potential headwind, or this skewed vision in which moving closer to equality is understood by other people as moving closer to tyranny in some way. Like, my favorite example of this is in 1964, in the midst of all of the conflict around the Civil Rights Act, and the filibuster and all of the incredible political upheaval that attends the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, a senator stands up, and a senator by the name of J. Lister Hill, who, and my colleague back there, Andrea, knows who I'm talking about, but a senator by the name of J. Lister Hill stands up and says that our Constitution recognizes no distinction among human beings, and that it is contrary to the American creed to create different categories of citizens. Now, to most people's ears, that is a speech that is an endorsement of the Civil Rights Act. But it's not. J. Lister Hill was a senator from Alabama, and he argued that by giving black people protections in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you were depriving white people because you were giving black people privileges that white people didn't have. It is the exact same logic as seeing someone hit by a car and calling an ambulance for that person, and the person who was standing on the side going, this is discrimination, you didn't call an ambulance for me. But you didn't get hit by a car.
You're not in the one in crisis.
Right. And so, or moreover, saying you didn't call an ambulance for the person who was driving the car. And so, in that instance, it's the same sort of logic that we see re-articulated with very similar results over time.
I want to, you brought up kind of our current moment, and so I want to ask you, just because, I mean, we are now in the second iteration of a Trump presidency, and so much of what happened last year, I think it was the velocity of what happened, I think was stunning for a lot of people, journalists not excluded from that. And so I feel like it probably helps that you are a historian, but I also wonder, just, do you find it especially challenging in this moment to write with clarity when you don't have distance or even a chance to recover from the last thing that happened before we have to think about the next thing and try to process the next thing?
I think that, yes, I think a lot of people have that same sentiment, that same feeling of trying to struggle for clarity in the midst of like a fog.
And a rolling fog at that.
A rolling fog. But also
and what we owe to the reader at that moment, right?
What'd you say?
And kind of what we owe to the reader.
What we owe to the reader, right. But it's also like why we have the phrase, this is a developing story. Because,
just put it at the end of everything.
At the end of everything, right, at the end of everything. And that could be the article, this is a developing story, that's it, But in reality, like the thing to keep in mind is that autocrats want to control your attention.
Yeah.
And so they're always kind of acting out, always doing things. And so it's, one of the classic examples of it is Kim Jong-un, who has the radios that are installed in every single household in North Korea. And the radios do nothing but broadcast his speeches 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you cannot turn the radio off. You can turn it down, but always he is at very least the ambient sound track to your life. And I think that we have this dynamic where it's, especially because we have this attention economy, and people make money over the ability to hold your attention on social media and all these other things. But we also are seeing the kind of memification of American life. And I mean, they're sending out memes for the war in Iran.
Yes.
Like in all of these kinds of things, but it's also meant to keep you engaged in the same sort of algorithm of social media, constant outrage, but you can't turn away. Which is why, I told my wife when we were looking at the election returns, I was like, we need some ground rules. I was like, we don't discuss this dude before noon, and we don't discuss this dude after 7 p.m.
Yeah.
Like, those are business hours. Like, but I don't wake up in the morning and talk about the outrages that the administration has imposed on the world.
Yeah.
I was like, catch me at lunchtime.
And I was going to say, because right, it's not like it's going anywhere.
Right.
Whenever you choose to clock in, so to speak,
Right.
it's sadly going to be right there. And I mean, you talk about everything that is going on social media, which kind of can make this feel constant, but also there's something about it that is at once ephemeral, but also just kind of becomes part of the climate. It's
Right.
literally the air that we're breathing right now, and so that is why I think a book like this, it makes me think a lot, and also just because, we're 2 decades in at this point in terms of the journalism career, so you have a body of work, and so you think about journalism also as a form of memory, right? So shaping how events are remembered, not just covering them, is so much of what you do now, and so so much of your work, even in training the next generation of journalists, is about helping journalists to understand their responsibility. Well, I guess I suspect that you agree with this, but I will just ask you about the responsibility that journalists really have to construct the historical record in real time, because that is so much of what we find ourselves doing, especially now in a way that feels particularly urgent.
Yeah, no, I tell students, because they have sometimes they've been misled, because they have this idea that there's a 1-to-1 ratio between your work and outcome, and there's not. You're like, there's not, exactly. And so David Remnick had a really good example about this. He was talking, because this is in the aftermath of, so the New York Times article comes out on Harvey Weinstein, and 5 days later, the New Yorker's article, Ronan Farrow's article on Weinstein comes out. And so I think the 1-2 punch of it create the effect of Me Too. Which, by the way, there was something going on at the New Yorker, and nobody knew what it was. Like, everybody was huddled around. And I'm never in the New Yorker offices, like rarely. But I happened to be in the New Yorker offices the day that that story broke. And I like ran upstairs. It was like, what's going on? Like, and everybody's like, you know, buzzing and talking about this story. But when, in the aftermath, on the other side of it, when people talked about the impact that those stories had as almost an inevitability, Ribnick started going through all of the powerful men who had been reported on as sexual abusers. And he was like, why not this person? Why not this person? What is the Fox News host? O'Reilly with the loofah sponges. That dude. And he was like, Bill O'Reilly, who got aired out and fired, but there was no movement that came. So he was like, there are 10 different examples that you could give, and it took this one. You can't reverse engineer like why this one blew up into this big social movement, but you know, because we don't know what the ratio is. So I tell my students, going back to your question, there's not a one-to-one ratio. You can go do your best work and nothing appears to change. The safer thing, and there may be, there's some chance that something will change on your 10th or your 50th story of this. But the safer thing, the thing that you can always do, is create a historical record. That every time you press record or broadcast, that every time you press send on something that you're filing, you are contributing to the ongoing historical record of this moment. And future people will rely upon that to catalog this moment. And so that is what we are here to do, among our responsibilities. And so that's the thing that I try to give them, like, this is the thing that you have control over, and the other things are at the whim of the very erratic, eccentric, inscrutable world that we live in.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I certainly think about that a lot in my work. I mean, I work at a newsroom that's named for the 19th Amendment, right? I mean, suffrage was a 100-year battle. And so, you know, so many people that lived through that documented it, like, they didn't get to see the 19th Amendment come into existence in their lifetimes. And so, yeah, thinking about not only, you know, getting things on the record for now, but to have a historical record for people who may come along 100 years from now. Somebody's going to pick up, you know, whatever form this book is in, and they're going to know, you know, what happened, and that feels important and meaningful when people come back and say, you know, what the hell happened back there? What the hell was that, right?
Tripping.
Y'all were tripping. Also could have been the title of this book.
Yeah. No, that would have been accurate. Y'all are tripping.
Y'all are tripping.
Right.
Y'all be tripping.
Y'all be tripping.
Well, I mean, I wonder if there are, I mean, because again, there's so many choices that we make about what we could cover on any given day, week, month, quarter, whatever. Are there stories from this era that you feel like we still have not fully reckoned with?
I mean, where do we start?
Anywhere.
Anywhere.
Yes.
I mean, there are like tons of them. So I'll just say the one that we've been talking about today. In the midst of all the stuff, I have been unsurprised by much of it, right? Because at the beginning of this, I told an editor at the New York Times, we went to lunch, and we were talking about all of the stuff that was happening in Trump 1.0. This is maybe 6 months in. And I said, we have different perspectives. It's like, you come from a place in which the institutions of the United States have generally worked. And they have assumed an air of infallibility. So when they begin to fail, it is a shock.
Yeah.
And it was like, I, on the other hand, am the son of a father who had a third-grade education because Black people were not allowed to get more than a third-grade education in the place where he grew up. So my position on the infallibility of American institutions begins there. in understanding the fragility of their commitment to equality and democracy and so on. And so that, much of this did not surprise me. But to your specific question, one of the things that does surprise me, which I think I got wrong, was if you had posed the question to me, I would have said, Americans will tolerate demagogues, we've tolerated them before. Americans will tolerate inequality, or a significant portion of them will, because we have before.
Sure.
And even a good deal of xenophobia, because we have before. But there's a general cultural disposition that will be disgusted by unsophisticated corruption. Not, if you have corruption that involves 3 different accounting firms and offshore accounts and little known laws that were passed, and if you do that, we're fine. We appreciate the elegance of it. You put some real, as your teachers would say, you applied yourself. But the
snake oil.
Right, the snake oil, smash and grab, unsophisticated envelope full of cash kind of corruption, we don't like that because we associate that with the third world, like the people who we look down on. The extent to which there's just been a grift that has characterized these years, and that the public and the political representation have generally, this has been very little of the conversation. That legitimately surprises me.
Sounds like your next essay. They be tripping. So.
They be stealing.
They be stealing.
Right.
But I mean, there is a through line in this book. I'm not gonna make you choke on that bottle of water. I'm gonna act right. There is this through line about power, right? About who has it and who challenges power and how power responds. And you're talking about kind of the fragility of American democracy, which I'm thinking a lot about, I know you are thinking a lot about as America is getting ready to mark this 250th anniversary and the stories that we're about to tell about who we are and have been and can be as a country. But I wonder just kind of what you think about this period reveals about the durability of American democracy, not just the fragility.
So I think there's 2 counter things, right? One is that people who talk most bombastically about American greatness. My friend Adam Serwer has this line, I think it was really great. He said that those people are not patriots, they're fans of America. And the relationship of a fan is fairly unsophisticated. The relationship of a patriot is complicated, And,
unless you're from Philadelphia or something.
Oh yeah, well that's different. Yeah, I know what I'm saying.
But actually
especially if you're from Philadelphia.
On both of those points, yes.
Yeah, especially.
Yes.
But in any case, that's neither here nor there. So, yeah, I think that what we are engaged with, and we've seen this, the attempt to remove the plaques about slavery, the attempts to sanitize, these versions of history, because, and this is what the weird thing is, the logic is that you disparage the country by showing all of its blemishes and all of its wrongs, when in fact, if there are not titanic wrongs, you don't have the opportunity to present titanic heroism. Yeah. It's a very simple, the hero's greatness is in exact proportion to the threat that he or she has to navigate. And so unless you can concede that slavery was evil, you cannot talk about what Abraham Lincoln led the country through, or Frederick Douglass, or we can go through the entire kind of array.
Yeah.
And so this attempt to sanitize the history of the nation is the product of America fans who don't want to actually talk about the complexity of what it is to be in this nation. And so if we go back, which I did, I went back to Ulysses S. Grant, who gave the centennial address for the nation. And then I went back through the 150th, 200th, and so on. And the general tendency, except for Ulysses Grant, oh my God, that speech. He was talking about how many hectares of wheat the country produced in 1776. And he was like, now we produce this many hectares of wheat and so on. And I was like, that speech is like 10,000 words long. And I was like, I don't understand. It was like abuse. And so it was just like it violated the Constitution in some way. But they generally had some sense of measuring American progress in terms of decency.
Not hectares.
Not hectares. But what we will get this year is a kind of oversimplified mash of almost comic book-like recitations of American triumph, which will mean nothing because they won't have any context in which what they're being juxtaposed against.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to come to you all for questions here in a minute, so get your questions ready, and somebody's going to, I believe, come around to you with a microphone, or maybe you come down to the microphone and ask questions. It looks like that is a fixed situation. But before I get to the audience question, one more I want to ask you, and that is, I mean, this 2012 to now arc that you cover in the book, reflecting on that, I mean, do you feel like we are in a fundamentally different country than we were in 2012? Or do you feel like we are finally beginning to see this country more clearly?
I think it's a little bit of both, actually. I think we're different, but we have a familial resemblance to, the prior versions.
Yeah.
Because Trump represents something very old in American politics and American history. And at the same time, he represents a kind of break, with a lot of things. And so in the old sense, in a very classic sense, when you look at right-wing populists in American history, it's like they get a script. They tend to have about 20% to 25% accurate diagnosis of a real economic condition. And the rest of it is an amalgam of paranoia, contempt, bigotry, conspiracy theories, bizarre economic theories, and grift. When I would talk with my students, and when I taught American history, about the second Klan, the resurgence of the Klan. The first Klan is basically killed by the federal government. And the second Klan, which arises after the release of Birth of a Nation in 1915, the second Klan really makes a run through the 1920s into the 1930s. And the student was like, well, what stopped them? And I was like, they did. They were corrupt and ignorant, and they grifted and stole from the Klan. And all sorts of things. It's like, what kind of white patriot steals from the Klan? But that was what did the Klan in. And when you look at those characters in the mold that follows, they tend to function like that. And so Trump, in that way, is a figure from central casting. I mean, you throw Joe McCarthy into that list too. In the other way, none of those people were president.
Yeah.
And that's very different. And none of them existed in the precise context that we exist in now. And I don't think that we've seen American politicians, particularly those in the Republican Party, operate out of a fear for their physical safety in the way that they do with Trump. I mean, I think that's the key to a lot of the deference to him, which is that people are worried that his followers will hurt them.
Or their family.
Or their families, if they go against them. And so I think that is kind of a both and.
Okay, with that, questions?
All right, so we can take about 3 questions, and if you're able to come to the microphone, we appreciate that, and if not, I will come receive your question and speak it into the mic.
Good evening, and thank you so much for being here. This has been a very interesting conversation. You talked about how we historically have been shocked into reform. I feel like these days, there is no more shock. And we have kind of settled into, okay, this is just what it is. What do you think is going to be that shock to get us out of this that we're in now?
That's the thing, I think we don't know. Because the other thing about this, and we can go back to, we were using contemporary examples when we were talking about Me Too, but the other thing is that we look at Montgomery as this amazing success, Montgomery bus boycott, but there had been a bus boycott 2 years earlier in Baton Rouge that failed. There had been other attempts at boycotts to break the back of segregation in public transportation that didn't work. Montgomery had the particular mix. Looking back in retrospect, King was the perfect leader for that moment. Was he? Because if that hadn't happened, if that hadn't worked out, he would have just been another dude, but it's him, the fact that he's not from there, the fact that he has Benjamin Mays in his ear, the fact that they have this very organized political wing of black women in Montgomery who very quickly translate Rosa Parks' actions into this bus boycott, the fact that mass communications has emerged at that moment, the fact that the Cold War is happening. And in retrospect, we can go, oh, okay, those dynamics make it possible. It means that King and the Montgomery Improvement Association walked into the room with assets that nobody prior to them had. I guarantee you none of that was visible to them in the moment.
Right.
And we never know what you're going to get. And so there could be, I will say this other thing, with George Floyd, because I had covered at least a dozen, maybe more, black people who had been killed by the police.
By then.
Yeah, by then. And I had seen the way in which city governments and state governments bureaucratize death, and they turn it into something else. When I saw that video of George Floyd, I was disgusted, but I really did not think that people were going to react to it. And my joke, kind of a joke, but it's not really a joke, is that I knew something was up when I saw the size of the protest in Salt Lake City. I was like, we not out there. It's like, that's not us.
Liberal skin in the game.
Exactly. And so I think that's the kind of motive, the kind of mindset that we have to have, that we do stuff. And even the thing they say about great artists is great artists are not necessarily the ones that produce the most great work. They just produce the most work overall. They produce a lot of terrible work. But the scale of things they produce, when you add it all up, they're like, oh man, look, so-and-so had all these bangers, and that's because you didn't hear those studio sessions that were terrible. Oh yeah, really?
We'll go back to the early cuts.
Don't go back to the early cuts, right. And so I think that that's what we're trying to navigate. We don't know the moment, we don't know the thing, and we just keep doing stuff.
Thank you.
Of all the offenses and damages to the country that Trump 1 and 2, who I like to think of as thing 1 and thing 2 from the Cat in the Hat,
Right.
just jumping out of the box and destroying the house. Of all of that, is there anything that you feel like is going to be long-lasting, is going to have real damage, whether it's cultural erasure? And do we have a historic analogy to a president attempting to thwart elections, which seems to be what's about to happen this fall?
Yeah, I mean, that, in the national sense, national elections, but that's the thing, goes back to the thing, I'm always this country had elections, every election prior to 1965 was an illegal election. Because, especially in places again, Mississippi and South Carolina, where black people are the majority of the population, right, the majority of the citizens can't vote. And so, I'm is it that far out of character for us? At the same,
distant.
Oh, that distant. At the same token, by the same token, I think one of the terrible things, I think, going back, I talked about this, I did a dialogue with David Rimnick, and we were talking about this, which is that in, I forget what year it was, Muhammad Ali, I saw the Muhammad Ali exhibit out there. Muhammad Ali had a bout with a British champion, a guy by the name of Henry Cooper. And Henry Cooper was, he was the British champion, but he was not thought of seriously, taken seriously as, by American standards as a boxer, especially not for someone who was as phenomenally gifted as Muhammad Ali. And he does something shocking, though. In like the second or third round, he unleashes this left hook, which Ali does not see coming at all. And it lands, and he knocks him flat on his butt. And people are shocked. And it's like not only has Ali been knocked down, but he's been knocked down by somebody who he was supposed to make light work of. And so Ali gets up and demolishes Cooper, just completely demolishes him. But the thing was that people who had heretofore been incredibly amazed by Ali's physical gifts noted like, oh, this dude has a hard time getting out of the way of a left hook. And later in his career, Ali met a gentleman by the name of Joe Frazier, who fed him a steady diet of left hooks. And Ali never, until even in the third fight where he eventually kind of finishes Frazier, but he never effectively gets out of the way of those left hooks. The analogy here is that irrespective of what Trump does, the most dangerous thing that he's done is that he's exposed the formula. Like he's shown, the country really can't get out of the way of a left hook. If it mixes this kind of cultural resentment against feminism, against civil rights, against all these things with a particular kind of populism in a particular kind of way. The otherizing, all of those kind of things that go into the formula of Trump, that this may be a recipe that we see for future American politics. Not that Trump is like Henry Cooper, he's done way more damage than Cooper did in that fight, but I think that that's the thing that I probably worry about the most. I'm sorry if I sound depressing.
Truthful. Do we have time for one more, maybe?
We do, you can have, yeah.
Hi. Thank you all for this very interesting discussion. My question is, both of you are have roots here in Atlanta, and our major newspaper has just done away with their print edition. And shrunk their staff at the same time. And we have very few other media alternative voices here in the city. What is either your observations about our situation here with journalism in Atlanta, or writ large? Are there the demise of journalism, or what are the bright spots?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did not expect to care as much as I cared on New Year's Eve when I found myself driving around for the last copy of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is my hometown paper, which is where I interned in college, and has been the paper of record forever in this city. And so the idea to me that there's an association with a real city having a physical newspaper, right, that went away for Atlanta at the end of last year. Does it still exist in digital form? Yes. What does that mean for a city that is already extremely unequal, right? We talk about the two Atlantas all the time. There's now an Atlanta that is divided between those who have access to news and those who do not, those who can pay for access to that news and those who cannot? How are they supposed to get access to, I mean, and not only the news, but the internet, right? Like if they are not online and getting access to that newspaper digitally, how are they going to get the news that's in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution? Local news as part of the fabric of a community, right? We both covered campaigns enough to know you go somewhere that you've never been before, you're on the ground, you can pick up a newspaper, you can read letters to the editor to find out what people actually care about, not what politicians are coming there to talk about, but what the people who live there actually care about. You lose that. Where are they going to get their letter to the editor now? Where are you going to read the letter to the editor? Maybe online, if you feel like clicking around for it, but maybe not. And so what is the civic tool that is really holding a community together if it is not their local newspaper? I don't know that we've necessarily found what the replacement for that is. Because you are seeing the erosion of local news alongside the erosion of many other institutions that we tend to associate with community and the holding together of community. And I think that that does matter. And I think that people should care. I think that I'm encouraged. I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out new media, startups. I helped to start a newsroom 6 years ago because I felt like political journalism was too male and too pale, and I was tired of talking about women like a special interest group, right? So we started the 19. Other places, starting and filling voids that they are seeing in coverage and representation. I think that's important. I think that we need to support those. I think that with the advent of the internet, when we were giving away the news for free, we are now in the position of having to train people to pay for the news, to see the news as something that is valuable and that is worth paying for. So I would say for people who believe in trusted, honest, accurate sources of information, you have to support that. But we must also be in relationship with the audiences that we expect to support us. That is a relationship that has been damaged if people's feelings about our beloved profession are any indication. We have work to do to repair that as well, but I do think increasingly more people are making the connection between a healthy and free press and a healthy democracy.
I can't add anything to that, except I will say, I will shout out the work that Errin does. Well, the work that she has been doing since I've known her, and also currently as president of an ABJ, is really on the front lines of trying to make sure that journalists and journalism are able to survive and also prosper. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention Ashley Fans there, who is an amazing journalist and an amazing investigator, which is like the funny thing is that I've known Ashley for many years.
Excavate.
And Ashley, you do not want Ashley in your business. Like if you did it just because
I want her in your business.
I want her in your business. She is going to find out like the thing that you did. So, and that's also characteristic of this. Like we've seen, I will add one quick thing. We've seen a lot of cowardice from news organizations. Let me just tell you this. That cowardice has been almost exclusively among the managerial class. Like the journalists who I know and who I have the good fortune to be around do not flinch. Like if it is there, they will report it. Even if they know, like, and I've had these conversations with people who know that the world is going to come crashing down on their heads and that there will be death threats and there will be attempts to intimidate and all those other things, and jail and all that other stuff. And they literally believe that the public's right to know is more important than their own physical safety. And so I just want to say that, like, managerial people, the corporate people, whatever those things are what they are, but I do not see the kind of capitulation among very many journalists themselves.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, so many of us still believe in journalism, and we hope that all of you still believe in journalism too, and will support journalism that you do believe in. Well, I mean, I think we have to close close out here, Jelani, but I just,
Oh, but you have.
do we have one more? Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, come on.
We can do a speed round.
You asked the question about where are people gonna go to get their news, and immediately I thought, well, TikTok, social media, AI. So my question is, there are some folks who believe that we're in a period of collective acceleration where we are kind of careening towards this tipping point where systems will fail, they'll fall, they'll fail, and that opens up this incredible opportunity for like real transformation, real revolution. In your Sankofa moment, as you're looking back to look forward, can you see a role for social media, for AI, particularly when it comes to historical record, when it comes to movement organizing? We know that as a tool, social media has been incredibly impactful in getting people to the streets, not just in the US, but internationally as well. Can you foresee a role in which we're not like all abhorrent of AI? Do you see a role for that in our future?
There's a couple things. One is that I have a rule when students, whenever a student wants to appeal a grade, I'm like open to it, sure. But if I revisit your paper, you know that your grade can go up or down. And that's the gambit. Which is to say that we've been sold this idea of kind of tech utopianism. But we've been sold it by people whose own commitment to the best things of the current order is tenuous at best.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that Elon Musk, you know, if I have a choice, you know, between, you know, Elon Musk's vision of the world and the current vision of the world, I think I'm going to stick with the one that we have. On the other side of AI, I mean, it's a tool. It will reflect what our priorities are and our prerogatives as human beings are in the particular moment. But I'm very skeptical, and I'm very wary of the sensibility of Silicon Valley right now, and also the idea that, even in the best case scenario, we're still at the mercy of an algorithm. And you know, those algorithms have optimized for anger, for engagement around things that, you know, we've seen utilized in ways that do not shore up democracy. We've come a long way since, you know, the Arab Spring, where we thought of social media as this unfailingly democratizing force. So it can go either way, we'll see. But I think I've reserved the right to just be very wary of where we're currently headed.
This is a developing story.
Thank you very much.
No, and I would just say to that too, I mean, I think that with the rise of AI, with mis and disinformation being what it is, trust and the truth and trusted messengers are really going to be its own kind of currency in the information economy that I think, you know, is definitely going to be a part of wherever this goes from here. So I want to say in closing that, you know, one of the things that this book makes clear is that history does not arrive all at once. It accumulates in moments and in decisions and in language and in witness. And that is what you have borne, and that is what we see in this book. That's what your work does all the time. You don't just help us to see those moments, but you really help us understand what they mean even while we're still inside them. And that has been so helpful to me, so helpful to so many people, and to be able to sit with this book and even think about what these moments mean. I think that's a testament to your power as a writer and a journalist. So thank you.
Can I say one thing? Before you all, I just want to add one thing. Thank you to the Auburn Avenue Research Library. And please use the resources here. I use them. One piece that's in here, there's a piece in the collection called Barack X, which was written on premises. I was running around and I needed to file a story, and I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to go to the Auburn Avenue Research Library and sit in and write this piece. And so that piece was written here, and all of the resources here were tremendously useful to me when I was living locally. And so, very much thank you to you. Thank you to Charis Books, and also.